With overfluxes currently going for upwards of 74 million coins, right now is the perfect time to be doing Svens. Add on to that the fact that wolf teeth have been steadily rising in price for a while now, and you have a perfect recipe for some mad profits. That is why this video is the third part of the Ultimate Slayer Guide, with today's topic being Sven Packmasters. So, if you want to learn about everything from the best locations and techniques to the best gear and items that you can use throughout the early, mid, and late stages of the game, I recommend that you stick around until the end. Before we get too far into it, I want to quickly remind you that at 30,000 subscribers, I will be giving away 300 million coins. All you have to do is subscribe and join my Discord server using the link in the description, or go to discord.gg/dkmcc123. As is standard for this series, the first thing I want to go over is the very basics of the boss itself and the drops that you can get from it. The Sven Packmaster is the hardest of the original 3 Slayers and comes in 4 different types, with the first having 2,000 health and the last having 2 million. Svens have 1 main active ability and 1 main passive ability, both of which are somewhat difficult to deal with if you don't know what you're doing. The 1 main passive ability that exists on tier 2, 3, and 4 wolves is that they deal true damage, meaning that they ignore all defense that the player has. They do also do regular damage, but most of what makes these bosses difficult in the early game is their relatively high true damage. Their active ability exists on tier 3s and 4s and makes them significantly more dangerous. At half health, they activate the ability Call the Pups, which spawns a swarm of small dogs that will deal a ton of damage to you if you're in the center of them. As long as you have the health and true defense to tank through this, it really isn't much of a problem, but it can slow you down quite a bit, as during this time when it's spawning the pups, it also becomes immune. Next up, let's talk about the drops, which are really the most important part of Svens. Although Svens have a total of 8 drops, there are really only 2 or 3 that are worth caring about. The first of these is the Grizzly Bait, which normally go for a little over 1 million coins, and are dropped from tier 4s once you have Sven 7. This drop can be crafted together with a Hunter Talisman and 3.5 stacks of golden teeth to craft the Hunter Ring, which is a rare talisman that increases the combat XP that you gain by 5%. The next drop is the Overflux Capacitor, which is one of the most iconic RNG drops in the entire game and is currently going for upwards of 75 or 80 million coins per. It's used to craft the Overflux Power Orb, which when upgraded to the Plasma Flux Power Orb is a very powerful buff that you can use for a lot of different things in the game. The Overflux is really what makes Svens worthwhile, and so that's why optimizing Magic Find is so important for doing Svens. The last arguably valuable drop that you can get from Svens is actually the token drop itself, which is Wolf Teeth. Compared to most of the other Slayers, Wolf Teeth are relatively valuable, meaning that you can make a decent bit of money back just from this alone. While it's not an insane amount of money, compared to Revs and Terras, it is pretty sizable. Now that we're done with all of that, let's talk about the gear that you should have and the techniques and locations that you should use to be most efficient at each level of the game. However, before we get into that, I want to quickly remind you that only a small percentage of you guys are actually subscribed, and it really would mean a ton to me. The good part about Svens is that their armor progression is extremely simple. If you can survive through the lower levels in a regular DPS set like Shadow Assassin or Necron armor, you're mostly fine, and then you can use basically any weapon in the game that you want. If you don't have the health to survive in that, then your next best option is Mastiff armor, and then pair that with something like a Shaman and a Pooch Sword. Mastiff armor is a very interesting set, as it increases your health a ton based on your crit damage, and also decreases your defense to 0. This makes it ideal for wolves, as it is really good against true damage. The best weapons to pair with Mastiff armor are the Shaman and the Pooch Sword, as they increase your damage based on your health, and they also both decrease the amount of damage that you take from wolves. The Pooch Sword also increases your damage towards wolves and is thus very good for dealing with Svens, especially in the early game. Most of the time in the early game, I recommend that you do Svens here in the castle, as the wolves here are significantly easier to kill, and also if you have an intimidation artifact, won't even attack you back. Finally, if you're really having difficulty killing the wolves, I recommend that you spawn them in or near water and then try to keep them there, as this prevents them from moving around a ton and lets you mostly deal damage to them without getting attacked back. However, it is very important to note that you do need to let them hit you every once in a while, because if they go for an extended period of time without attacking you, they'll start to regen health very quickly. Once you've progressed past the stage of really having to worry about surviving through Svens, and you can start using them to make significant amounts of money from their drops, here are a couple of the different armor sets and setups that you can use to be efficient in different ways. ways. Before we get into that though, I want to talk about this place, which is the Howling Cave, and also I want to discuss the different methods that you can use to spawn the bosses. The Howling Cave is a region inside the park that spawns significantly more powerful and dangerous wolves that can allow you to gain more combat XP faster. In my opinion, there are 3 or 4 different valid ways that you can spawn bosses inside both the Howling Caves and the castle. First is the Frozen Scythe. The difficulty with doing Svens with a Frozen Scythe is that wolves are significantly smaller and faster than zombies and spiders. Next up is another mage weapon, and that is the Spirit Scepter, which has a huge AoE and can easily one-tap all of the spirit wolves. However, the difficulty is that it sucks up a ton of mana, meaning that most of the time you'll be spawning the boss in a different armor set than you're killing it in. This is because, unlike tarantulas, wolves don't take magic damage, meaning that it's pretty inefficient to use a mage set to kill the bosses. That is why the most popular option in my opinion is the explosive bow. However, there are a few caveats to using this bow in the Howling Caves. The explosive bow is most efficient when you don't have to draw it back all the way, meaning that it is best to be able to one-tap wolves off crit with the explosive bow. Also, it's best to use icy arrows as they increase your damage by the highest amount. Doing this in any sort of damage set really isn't that difficult, however, that isn't always the most efficient option. There are a number of different armor sets that you can use for Svens in the late game, and I'm going to go over all of them in order from cheapest to most expensive. The first armor setup, which is also arguably the most commonly used, is full Sorrow armor. A setup like this can get you upwards of 200 magic find, and it allows you to kill the bosses with relative ease. The way you can accomplish this is with a combination of 3 weapons, and those are the Soul's Rebound, the Giant Sword, and the Daedalus Axe. To most effectively use a setup like this that normally relies on melee DPS, you want to first hit the boss with a Soul's Rebound shot, and then hit it between 5 and 6 times with a Giant Sword. This will mean that when it does proc that damage, it will immediately be killed, and it skips the pups phase. From there, you can hold out a Daedalus Axe, meaning that you get the increased magic find from the Black Cat. If you are going to go for a setup like this, I recommend one of 2 options for spawning the boss. The first option is switching armor sets while you are spawning the boss, which can either be to a melee set and then use an explosive bow, or be to a mage set and then use a Frozen Scythe and a Spirit Scepter. The other option is to massively redo your talisman bag to favor strength instead of crit damage. This is because even with a setup like what I'm using, which massively favors having single hit damage over DPS, I still don't even have 1000 strength, and you normally need around 1200 to be able to one-tap with an explosive bow. This does sacrifice some amount of damage with your Giant Sword, but you'll only really need to hit it between 6 and 7 times in the 5-second period, which is easily doable. If you don't like how squishy this armor set is and the relatively low damage that it deals, you can replace the helmet with a Warden helmet. This will give you significantly higher EHP and health, and will make you deal tons more damage. If even that does not suffice, you can switch over to something like 3/4 Necron with a Warden helmet, which gives you tons more health, tons more defense, and also gives you a lot more damage. If you're just going for boss efficiency, this is normally the kind of setup that I would recommend. You can also keep something like a Tarantula helmet in the first slot of your inventory, so you can quickly switch it out with your Warden helmet while you're spawning. This gives you a ton more mobility and makes it so that you can much more easily spawn the boss and then switch over to the Warden helmet to actually deal damage to it. The last armor set, which also happens to be the most expensive and also the most fun, is an Elegant Tuxedo with a Warden helmet. With an Elegant Tuxedo and a Warden helmet, along with a fully optimized talisman bag, a Giant Sword, and a level 100 legendary E-Drag, you can one-tap tier 4 wolves, and that is a lot of fun and is very, very efficient. It does, however, of course, make you extremely squishy, normally taking your EHP to around 2000 and obviously setting your health at 250. However, even with this, you can normally tank at least 1 hit from the tier 4 Sven, meaning that as long as you don't get hit twice, you can always kill them. While this isn't necessarily the most efficient or most effective way to do Svens, it is my personal favorite, and it is also a ton of fun. The last thing that I want to note about Svens is trading. Trading with Svens is of utmost importance because they give a massive amount of XP compared to the regular mobs. However, However, trading Svens is not like trading Terras or Revs because often you will have to separate from your trading partner, meaning that occasionally you will have to go across the entire Howling Cave whenever they spawn a boss. This means though that to be most efficient, most of the time it is valuable that when you spawn your boss that you actually take it down to half health and then just let it sit there. Not only does this skip a very annoying part of the boss fight, but it also allows your trading partner to kill the pups that spawn around the boss for extra combat XP. For pets, for spawning the bosses there really is only one valid option, which is of course the wolf pet. The wolf pet is by far the most effective for spawning bosses as it increases your combat XP by 30%. For actually killing the bosses, you have a number of different options. If you want to optimize magic find, then you should go for something like a griffin or a black cat. If you want to have higher DPS, then an ender dragon is of course the best, and if you're dealing with tankiness, then you should go for something like a blue whale. Of course, there are also a number of other valid options, however these are just my personal favorites and what I would think are the best. However, I do strongly recommend that you experiment and try things out for yourself. And with that just about wraps it up for this video. If you're interested in learning about Revs or Terras, I'll be linking the other two videos in this series down in the description below. I also love answering questions about all things Skyblock in my Discord server, which I strongly recommend you join so you can interact with me and my community. I do very much hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you did, a subscribe would be much appreciated. I'll see you guys later, and adios.